He offered me $50 million to look two little girls in the eye and let them call me mommy. And God help me, I said yes. Because I was drowning, because my father was dying, and because the man standing in front of me, calm, composed, his jaw tight like he was holding back a tidal wave, looked me dead in the eyes and told me his wife was gone. Don't look away. I need you to understand exactly why I made the choice I made before you decide what kind of woman I am. This is a story about grief and desperation and a lie so clean, it nearly destroyed 3 lives. Stay with me, because you are absolutely not ready for how this ends. It started the way the worst things in life always do, with a coincidence so absurd you almost laugh. I was catering. That's what I did. 4 in the morning starts, hauling food across the city in a van that burned oil and rattled on the highway. That Saturday I had a delivery to the Vance estate, one of those properties in the hills where the driveway alone is longer than my whole apartment building. I had done enough high-end catering to know how to be invisible in a rich person's home. Eyes down, move quick, don't touch anything that isn't on your cart. I was standing in the foyer when one of the household staff walked in and stopped dead. She went white, not pale, white, like every drop of blood had drained from her face in a single second. She stared at me for what felt like a very long time, then turned and walked quickly out of the room without saying a single word. I stood there holding a tray of miniature crab cakes thinking I had done something wrong. 3 minutes later, Adrian Vance walked in. He was tall, dark-haired, the kind of man whose money was quiet rather than loud. He wore it the way you wear a skin, naturally, without thinking. But the expression on his face when he saw me was nothing like a man in control of anything. It was the face of someone who had just watched a dead person walk through the door. He stood there for almost a full minute without speaking. "I'm sorry," he finally said, and his voice was careful in the way you are careful around something fragile. "You look exactly like my wife." Not similar, not a passing resemblance, exactly, same bone structure, same coloring, same way I apparently tilt my head to the left when I'm confused, which I didn't even know I did until he told me. His wife had been gone for 8 months. He told me about his daughters over coffee in a kitchen that cost more than my father's entire house. Twins, just turned 3, Lily and Nora. He showed me a photo on his phone, 2 little girls with dark curly hair and the kind of eyes that could break you open with one look. He told me they had stopped eating normally, that they still walked into rooms looking for their mother, that Lily had started sleeping on the floor by the front door because she believed, with the complete certainty of a 3-year-old, that if she waited long enough, Mommy would come back. He told me this with no expression on his face at all, which, I would later understand, was the most dangerous sign I missed. He made the offer within the week, $50 million placed into a trust the morning I signed, not paid out over time, not contingent on his satisfaction. Done. A stylist to match the hair, a voice coach to soften my accent toward hers, a wardrobe reconstructed entirely from photographs. He was not asking me to be her. He was asking me to be close enough that his daughters could stop looking. I want to be completely honest about why I said yes, because I think the easy version of this story, the one where I was simply greedy, lets me off the hook in a way I don't deserve. My father had been sick for 2 years. Pancreatic, stage 3, diagnosed right around the time I had finally gotten our family into a stable place after years of barely making rent. He needed a specialist in Houston. He needed treatments that insurance called experimental and declined to cover. I had been working 4 jobs for 18 months, and it was not enough, and it was never going to be enough, and I knew it. I used to sit in my car outside the hospital and do the math over and over on a napkin, like somehow the numbers would change. $50 million was not a fantasy to me. It was my father getting on a plane to Houston. It was my mother not having to choose between medication and groceries. It was survival, not for me, but for every person I loved. So I became Alina Vance, one rehearsal at a time. The voice coach worked with me for 3 weeks. Alina had grown up in Connecticut. I grew up in western Pennsylvania, which apparently sounds like an entirely different country. We drilled vowel sounds for hours. I watched footage of Alina videos from the girls' birthday parties, clips from charity galas, candid phone videos that Adrian pulled from the cloud, until I understood not just how she sounded but how she moved, where she put her hands when she was listening, how she laughed. The first time I walked into the girls' playroom, I was shaking inside. Lily looked up from the floor where she was arranging small plastic horses in a circle. She looked at me for a long moment, the way children do when they are deciding something important. Then she stood up, crossed the room, and wrapped her arms around my legs. She didn't say anything, she just held on. I had to look at the ceiling to keep from crying. Because if I started, I would not be able to stop, and I did not know how to explain to a 3-year-old why the woman who was supposed to be her mother was falling apart. The first time they called me Mommy, I excused myself to the garden, stood outside in the cold November air with my arms wrapped around myself until I could make my face do the right things again. Not because it felt wrong, because it felt devastatingly, terrifyingly right. And that scared me more than anything I had ever experienced in my life. I told myself it was a role, that I was helping, that these were real children with a real developmental need for stability, and I was providing something genuine inside an arrangement that was false. I told myself that every day for 4 months. Then one evening in February, just after dusk, someone knocked on the servants' entrance. I was closest. Adrian was in his office. The girls were already in bed. I walked down the back hallway thinking it was a delivery, already rehearsing the quick exchange, already tired in the bone-deep way. I had been tired every day since I started. I opened the door, and I was looking at my own face. Not similar, not like looking in a mirror, like someone had taken a photograph of me and printed it, altered it slightly, tired in a different way, thinner through the jaw, eyes that had seen something mine hadn't. But the face was mine. We stood there staring at each other for a moment that I think neither of us will ever be able to fully describe. "You must be her," she finally said. Her voice was quiet and careful, not angry, something past angry. He really did it. Her name was Alina Vance, and she was not dead. She had left. She told me all of it standing in the cold of the back doorway. She did not ask to come inside. She told me like a woman who had rehearsed what she would say when she finally found the words but still wasn't sure she could get through them. Adrian had not been a monster in the ways people recognize as monstrous. He had never raised his voice. He had never left a mark. He had simply replaced every version of her she offered him with the version he preferred, quieter, less opinionated, more contained, until one day she realized she could not find herself anywhere in her own life. Not in the clothes she wore, not in the friends she'd been slowly edged away from, not in the woman who looked back at her from the bathroom mirror. She had walked out with nothing but her name and the clothes she was wearing. She had spent 8 months in a room in her cousin's house in Minnesota getting stable enough to fight. For the girls. That was the only reason she had stayed gone this long, not because she didn't want them, but because she knew she would not survive a custody battle against his lawyers unless she was steady, unless she had documentation, unless she had time. She had come back to find a woman who looked exactly like her, already living her life. And standing there in the cold doorway, watching her face as she said it, I understood, with the complete clarity you only get when a lie collapses, exactly what I had been hired to do. Adrian had not hired me out of grief. He had hired me as bait. A living lure designed to make Alina believe she had been replaced so completely that coming back would be unbearable. Or to draw her home and use her return, her presence in the house, her instability, her 8 months of absence, to build the custody case that would ensure she could never take the girls and leave again. I had walked into a trap built for someone else, and for 4 months I had been holding it open. I looked at the woman on the other side of that door for a long time. I thought about $50 million. I thought about my father in a hospital bed in Pittsburgh doing the kind of math that shouldn't have to live in anyone's head. I thought about Lily on the floor by the front door, waiting. And then I thought about what it means to be replaced, to offer someone the real version of yourself and have them hand it back and ask for something more manageable. I opened the door all the way, and I stepped aside. "They're both asleep," I said. "Lily is in the room at the end of the hall. She sleeps on top of the covers because she runs warm, just like you probably knew, and she still has the pink horse. She named it Mama." Elena Vance walked past me into her own house. I am not going to tell you that what I did before that moment was right. It wasn't. I walked into a situation without asking enough questions because I needed the money, and the need was real, and the desperation was real, and none of that makes the harm I could have caused any less real. What I will tell you is this. Grief is a door some people walk through, but obsession is a door some people use to trap others inside. Elena did not run because she was a bad mother. She ran because staying was erasing her. No amount of money, no amount of devotion, no amount of longing makes it acceptable to turn a person into a possession. And no amount of fear makes it acceptable to use your own children as leverage against the person who bore them. When I stepped aside and let her in, I did not lose $50 million. I found out what I was actually worth. What happened inside the house that night. I should have left that night. I know that now. I had done what I came to do. I opened the door. I stepped aside. Elena Vance walked back into her own home. My job there, whatever it had really been, was over. But I didn't leave. I told myself it was because it was late, because I had nowhere to go right that second, because my coat was upstairs and my keys were in the kitchen, and I needed 5 minutes to collect myself. But the truth is that I couldn't move. I stood in that back hallway and I listened, and what I heard changed me in ways I am still figuring out. Adrian came out of his office around 9 o'clock. He heard her voice before he saw her. I was at the end of the hallway. He didn't know I was there. I watched his face when he realized what was happening, and I want to be very honest with you about what I saw. It wasn't guilt. It was calculation. For just 1 second, maybe 2, his eyes went cold and sharp, like a man running numbers, like someone deciding which move to make on a board. Then it was gone, and his face rearranged itself into something softer, something that looked like shock, something that looked like relief. He was very, very good at this. "Elena," he said, and his voice cracked just right. She turned around slowly. She had been standing in the living room, not touching anything, just looking, like she was checking that the room was still real. "Don't," she said. Just that one word, don't. He stopped. And in that one small moment, I understood something about the two of them. She had spent years learning exactly how far his voice could reach before it became something else. She knew where the line was, and she was standing just on the other side of it. Lily woke up at 11:47. I know because I was still sitting on the floor in the hallway with my back against the wall and my knees pulled up, and I had been watching the clock on my phone like it was something I could hold on to. I heard her before anyone else did, small feet on hardwood, a door creaking open, then silence like she was standing there figuring out what was different about the air tonight. Elena heard it too. She was up the stairs before I even got to my feet. I followed. I don't know why. I think I needed to see it. I think after 4 months of pretending, I needed to see what the real thing looked like. I stopped at the top of the stairs. Elena was crouched down in the hallway outside Lily's room, and Lily was standing in the doorway in her pajamas, the yellow ones with the small stars on them that she picked out herself every single night. Lily looked at her for a long time. Kids that age don't always have the words, but they have something better. They have that deep animal knowing, the kind that lives in the body before language gets to it. She had been sleeping on the floor by the front door for 8 months, waiting. And now she was standing very still, like she was afraid that if she moved, this would turn into a dream. "Mama," she said, barely a whisper. Alina made a sound I will never be able to describe. It wasn't a word. It wasn't even really a sound. It was more like something that had been held underwater for too long finally breaking the surface. She opened her arms. Lily ran. Nora slept through the first 5 minutes of it. Nora has always been the heavier sleeper, but kids know, even in their sleep, when something big is happening in the house. She appeared in her doorway, rubbing her eyes. She saw Alina on the floor of the hallway, holding Lily, both of them crying without any sound. Nora did not run. She walked, slow, deliberate, like a tiny person who has learned to be careful about things that look too good. She stopped right in front of Alina. She reached out one small hand and touched Alina's face, just touched it, like she was checking. Then she climbed into her arms too. I had to press my hand over my mouth. I was crying, standing at the top of the stairs in a house that was never mine, in clothes that belonged to another woman's life, crying harder than I had cried since my father's diagnosis. Because what I was watching was the most real thing I had ever seen, and for 4 months I had been a substitute for it. Alina sat on the floor with both girls in her lap for a long time. She didn't explain anything. They were 3. Explanations would come later, in small pieces over years, shaped carefully by someone who loved them enough to tell the truth slowly. But she said 3 things that I heard from the stairs. The first thing she said was, "I came back." The second thing was, "I never stopped." And the third thing, the one that broke me completely open, was this. Lily asked her, in that small, serious voice 3-year-olds use when they are asking something they have been carrying for a long time, "Did you forget us?" Alina pulled her tighter. "Baby," she said, "you were the only thing I remembered." I had to sit down on the top step. I sat there and I cried, and I let it happen because there was no one to hold my face together for any more. I left before dawn. I wrote a note. I left it on the kitchen counter where the staff would find it, not Adrian. It said that I was terminating the arrangement, that I had no intention of accepting the money, and that I would be available to speak with Alina's attorney if that was ever useful. I walked out the same back door she had come in. It was cold, February cold, the kind that gets into your coat. I sat in my car in the service lot for a while before I could drive. I thought about my dad. I thought about the treatments and the specialist in Houston and the math that still didn't add up. And then I thought about Lily asking her mother if she had forgotten them. And I started the car. I want to tell you what happened after, as briefly and honestly as I can. Adrian's attorneys contacted me within 48 hours. The tone of that conversation made it very clear that I was expected to stay quiet, return nothing, and disappear. I did not do any of those things. I spoke with Alina's attorney. I gave a full account, the arrangement, what I was told, what I was not told, what I understood my role to actually be once I figured it out. I don't know how much weight it carried in the end. I'm not a lawyer. I can't read those rooms. What I know is that Alina got her daughters. I found that out 6 weeks later from a news alert I almost scrolled past. 2 paragraphs buried in a local court roundup. Custody awarded. Father granted supervised visitation pending review. I read it 3 times in a parking lot outside the hospital where my dad had his follow-up appointment. Then I went inside and sat with him for 2 hours and didn't say anything about any of it. People always ask about the money. I didn't take it. I know that sounds like the obvious choice now. It did not feel obvious at 2 in the morning standing in a hallway with nothing but a note and a set of car keys. My father got into a trial program. Not the Houston specialist, something closer, something that insurance actually covers with a fight. He's not cured, but he's still here. That matters more than I can put into words. I still work catering. I picked up a second job doing corporate event coordination. It's slower than $50 million. It's real in a way that $50 million, the version I was offered, never would have been. I think about Lily sometimes. I think about how she named that small pink horse Mama, how she slept on the floor by the front door every night for 8 months, just waiting, how she stood in that doorway in her star pajamas and asked the one question that must have lived in her chest like a stone. Did you forget us? I think that is what people are most afraid of, not being lost, being forgotten, being replaceable, being something that someone else can step into and fill well enough that no one notices the difference. Elena wasn't replaceable. I know that now. I looked exactly like her and I still wasn't close. Because the girls didn't need her face. They needed her. And when she walked through that door, they knew. Kids always know. I was the one who opened it. I would do it again. Tell us what you think about this story and where you're watching from in the comments if this hit you. And follow for more heartwarming stories. Share it, because somewhere out there is a person who needs to hear that being erased is not the same as being gone. That coming back is possible. That the door can still open.